Guys, I have some terrible news. Chi-Chi, she's been power crept by Escoffier. I know, shocking, right? But while everyone's calling Escoffier broken, well, the reality is, it all depends who else is in the team. And in this video, I will actually share my results with all the Cryo, Hydro, and even other element units that I have tested with Escoffier in a so-called tier list format to determine who can benefit the most from her. And in this way, you can see for yourself if she's actually broken by herself or needs some extra help. Not only that, I'll also showcase her potential with several weapons, and of course, let you know if this Constellation Zero chef is worth pulling for. Okay, so a quick rundown of my build for this showcase. I am using Golden Troop with attack, cryo, critical rate main stats, but you could potentially use Blizzard Strayer, although be careful with overcritting. And in general, Golden Troop remains the most reliable set. Also, Cryo Goblet is usually used for better damage, while Attack Goblet, if needed, can be used for better healing. And as for weapons, right now and in most of this video, she'll be using Favonius Lance, but I'll also later compare it to other options, including the signature weapon. Finally, her talents are 1, 10, and 10 because I am not wasting more on raising her normal attacks. I am already about to be poor, and Aoife is still not raised yet. But yeah, finally, remember, in this video, she will be Constellation Zero. Anyway, let's get down to business. Why is this angry chef so beloved? Well, I think this is probably one of the most egregious cases of role consolidation because Escoffier can do everything. She can provide serious healing, her damage output is quite amazing, and most important of all, she can apply an insane resistance shred debuff. In fact, the way it works is quite simple. Her second passive states, if the team has Hydro or Cryo teammates, then for each one, whenever Escoffier's skill or burst deals damage, the enemy's Hydro and Cryo resistance will be lowered by 5, 10, 15, and 55%. So in other words, if the whole team is made up of Cryo and Hydro teammates, Escoffier will lower resistances by 55%, as you can see here on the rightmost side. The damage increase for everyone is going to be huge. This is actually quite better than Viridescent Rare Artifact set because she doesn't have to even trigger a reaction, just simply needs to damage the enemy, and the decrease is 15% bigger, plus she can do it off-field and even reapply it on new waves of enemies. What can I say? It's simply broken for Cryo/Hydro teams. But let's take a look at her own personal potential. By tapping her skill, she will summon this, cooking mech, which will initially deal some damage and also land a small Uzi attack, if anyone still remembers this useless mechanic from Fontaine. Afterwards, for 20 seconds, she will deliver this Frosty Parfait hit around 20 times total. And I know individually these hits, especially on Favlance, don't look impressive, almost 11k damage each, but this overall ends up dealing 4,320% motion value at talent level 10. Which is an insane amount, and in actual raw damage numbers, that would be around 220k damage. Remember, the only buff she's benefiting from right now is the 55% resistance shred, since she's in a full Cryo/Hydro team, but as you can see when playing her in a team that has Farina and Shenhe, well, this damage absolutely skyrockets as you can see here, especially since you could even include 2 Shenhe skill taps to provide 10 ice equals to Escoffier. But other than damage info, this skill also follows any active character, has a really big range, and also can sometimes deal AoE damage if enemies are close enough. However, I think the targeting logic is based on proximity because it is important against multiple enemies to land the skill so their resistance is shredded, otherwise you need to rely on the burst to do the debuff, but overall it seems like targeting is not smart enough, it just goes for the closest target usually. Now, she also has a hold version of the skill, but it's not for combat. Well, I mean you could go inside the abyss and do it like I did, but basically this hold version allows you to hit the cooking mech with attacks and cook some unique dishes. In fact, one of them is much more powerful 5-star dish, which is pretty crazy. And technically, this skill has the longest cooldown in the game, 604,800 seconds. And before you think I lost my marbles here, the whole version goes on a cooldown until next weekly reset. So yeah, if you literally activate this skill right after the weekly reset, it will go on a 1-week cooldown, or 604,800 seconds. Anyway, moving over to the burst, it's got a big, sexy 1067% multiplier, which on Favlance, it ends up dealing around 41k damage. And then she also provides a decent team-wide heal. With this build, it's almost 8000 HP heal, so with attack scaling units, usually it's enough to at least heal them half of total HP, but with HP scalers, it won't heal them too much. But luckily, the first passive also kicks in after the burst, and then for 9 seconds, or 9 times total, the active unit will be healed around 2400 HP, and as we can see, Farina after the burst, when switching to her as the active unit, just because she's an HP scaler, well, she actually gets fully healed and then some, so that's nice. But yeah, if you haven't figured it out yet, her playstyle is literally just press E, Q, and swap out. By doing this, she can deliver without other buffs around 260k damage. And then this is how much more it becomes with Furina and Shenhe, quite massive as you can see. Finally, when it comes to field testing the weapons to reveal the overall damage shown in the upper part, I've chosen both event-exclusive polearms, Missive Wind Spear, and the Lantern polearm. Then of course we have Favonia's Lance and the signature. Overall, I'd say while Favonia's Lance definitely has the worst personal damage out of them all, I've noticed if there's no Shenhe in the team, or basically a few other cryo units, even if Escoffier's burst costs 60 energy, it actually varies team by team if her burst will be ready in a new rotation. So long story short, Favonia's Lance is the most reliable weapon to trigger her burst. And for example, while her signature here is dealing tons of damage compared to others, it doesn't provide any energy recharge. So you either need it from substats or might even have to go with ER Sands. But yeah, besides these weapons, there's also the 5-star stat sticks, and honestly, all of them end up being better than 4-star options, but obviously weaker than the signature. Okay, enough with the personal showcase. Time to get to the meat and potatoes of this video. Let me be frank here. When most content creators are talking about Escoffier, they're really talking about Escoffier with Furina. And in this ranking or tier list format I've prepared, it's important to acknowledge the core members, or basically 95% of all Escoffier teams, aside from those where she's providing cryo application and damage. So, Furina is the most essential member for almost any cryo/hydro team. Then there's Shenhe, who's cryo resist and shredding, cryo damage boosting, and most important of all, Icy Quills will give massive boost to cryo damage dealers such as Ayaka. Then there's Yelan and Xingqiu to provide powerful hydro damage, and of course, Citlali's there to boost damage with Rolling Tails or her signature, plus she also shreds some hydro resistance, and most importantly, provides the big elemental damage boost with Cinder City artifacts set. So, with the boring yet factual info out of the way, who actually gains a straight up upgrade in terms of performance? Well, you've probably heard this by now, but it's pretty clear Ayaka has received a serious facelift, and can now easily compete with some of the top meta teams, even if the boss is not freezable. Of course, this team still remains exceptionally premium. You'll need Furina, Shenhe, and Escoffier to enable Ayaka's new beast mode. But comparing to some all-team comps like Kazuha and Shallonen duo boosting her, and Ayaka ends up dealing about 50% more damage, plus Escoffier also provides a lot of off-field damage too, thanks to Shenhe's Icy Quells. Moving over, we have Wriothesley. Before the chef, his best teams were Melt, but now, thanks to Escoffier, this guy either competes or even outperforms his previous Melt comps. So it's a straight up upgrade for him, just because this new team playstyle is now another option he can go for, and deal significant damage. Although, scratch that. He won't deal a ton of damage himself, but the team's overall damage will be superb. Also, he can go for two variations here, one with Shenhe and another with Yelan. And this core of Furina, Yelan, and Escoffier is called Wheelchair. Yeah, I know, weird name, but let me explain why. So back in the early days, the CN community dubbed Zhongli and Albedo as the Wheelchair team, and then by including any other two units, good old Shlongli and Albedo would carry the deadweight. Then when Shallonen showed up, Wheelchair evolved into Chiori plus Shallonen to be the carries. And now thanks to Escoffier, this new, or I guess additional wheelchair option is now the Chef, the Hydro Archon, and female Xingqiu. In fact, I've made an entire tier of just wheelchair to explain the impact of it, but we'll go back to it in a moment. Alright, so the next upgrade that feels deserved goes to our sweet child. Yes, International exists, but with Escoffier, Citlali, and Furina, that's no longer the case. Now, obviously, depending on enemy lineup, this is either an upgrade or about as good as International. Most important of all, just like with Wriothesley, this is a new competitive team comp option Child can go for. Oh, and you could also just use Child in wheelchair. Oh man, that sounds so weird. Finally, the last three slots are occupied by Rosaria, Kaya, and Big Chungus. I mean, sure, Rosaria and Kaya always had the option to go for melt comps, maybe Chongyun as well, but the point is, with Escoffier and Furina, they absolutely become elevated. In fact, while this current Abyss cycle doesn't prove much because it boosts cryo skill damage by 75%, which is like a separate golden true bonus set for Escoffier, I was still able to easily clear this whole second side of Abyss with Rosaria, Kaya, and Xingqiu as the free-to-play 4-star team comp. I could have also easily swapped out Kaya for Chongyun to keep Xingqiu's company, but the point is, Escoffier definitely elevates these 4-star cryo damage dealers. Now, time to talk about the wheelchair team core, or Escoffier, Furina, and Yelan core. And I know, just the perfect test subject, everyone's favorite, limited, no longer available, and yet the most coolest of them all, Aloy. Yeah, I put her into this team and she does stuff. It's not much, but she gets carried easily. Same goes for Fremine. Nobody cares about this poor guy. But I mean, you can easily use him in this team core. And what about Eula? Well, funny thing is, previously her best teams were Hyper Bloom and Shenyun Pyroplunge, both of which had nothing to do with her physical damage. And now this also has absolutely nothing in common with her, other than boosting a bit of her cryo damage. And yet, this is like a serious upgrade to her. I am not even kidding. But moving over to some more actual contenders for Wheelchair, Ayato is actually super nice in this team comp. Usually Wheelchair is just there to pull the non-meta unit's weight, but in here, Ayato definitely contributes thanks to the buffs he can take advantage of from all three of these lovely ladies. Finally, we have Kokomi. Building her as the on-field damage dealer in this team actually ends up pretty nice because even with Escoffier, Furina's fanfares still can benefit a lot from a second healer. So not only is everyone dealing their damage here as intended, but Kokomi helps build up fanfare much faster. And look, long story short, anybody who's in the Wheelchair tier means it's either an upgrade for them or they simply just function, which is a huge W regardless. Now, moving over to the great tier, we have Chaska, which when I tested, worked really well in Citlali, Furina, and Escoffier team. Although just because Mohwika exists means this isn't going to be the best Chaska's team, but it's good regardless of it. And also with this setup, Hydra will have 35% resistance shred thanks to Citlali, while Cryo will only have 15%, so shooting Hydro bullets ends up better for Chaska. Then we have Ganyu. Unfortunately, due to so many units that I need to test, I am not able to confidently say if she's receiving an upgrade from Escoffier because, while she is great for Ganyu, I feel like her melt teams still perform better than just freeze comps. And this might change later, but for now, she's just good with the chef. But moving over to the Cryo Provider tier, yeah, as you probably figured, she won't be providing too much resistance shred and will most likely be only relevant to her or if running with Furina together, but the massive 55% shred only comes from a full team of Hydro/Cryo. So for the Pyro DPS units, Hu Tao seems to be fine with her, kind of a similar situation as with Citlali. Escoffier doesn't have the greatest cryo application since it happens every other hit, but it does feel slightly better than Citlali's. Plus, you only just have to tap the skill, and in most of these teams, where she acts as a cryo applicator, the energy requirements will be huge. So if the burst is not required, or in other words, if there's no Furina in the team, it's fine to just focus on pure sub DPS build, especially if not running Favonius. But yeah, for Gaming's case, she is great help to trigger those melts, same goes for Arlecchino, just gotta make sure to time the melts correctly. And then finally, as for Mohwika, again, iced coffee can be good for her, but she'll be nowhere as good as Citlali. Alright, we're at the last tier that I call It Depends. So first we have Neuvillette. Since I have him at C0R1, which is the perfect way to test him, the passive that improves his laser damage based on different reactions will not feel impactful, and in fact, playing him in double Hydro Cryo team with Furina and Escoffier, along with someone like Citlali, ends up either being his best or one of the best teams. However, once he becomes C1, then usually it's better to run him with the default meta units like Kazuha and Shilonen. However, if you don't have them, then yeah, it's still gonna be great. Then with Knich, I actually gave Escoffier the Deepwood set and Mohwika was on Cinder City to maximize his damage. It's pretty good, although similar to being a cryo applicator in previous tier, it's not the most amazing results Knich can achieve, at least from my own testing, unless I misunderstood something. Then we have the Geo trio, Navia, Chiori, and Shilonen. Basically, if Escoffier is with Furina, going with two of these three Geo units can be good, but again, it sometimes depends on enemy matchup, and for example, if Chiori is C1, which helps summon her second doll without any Geo constructs present. Finally, we have Xiangling and Benny Boy. They're just thrown in here if you sometimes need attack boosting or want to go for some melt comps, but overall, they are not in any way going to be the best Escoffier choices. Oh, and yeah, the rest of the Cryo and Hydro units I have at the bottom here, honestly, there's not much synergy going on here. Maybe one of the more interesting picks for Escoffier could be Candace to boost normal elemental damage in some wacky team comps, but overall, you can just throw in any of these units into the Wheelchair tier, and I think it'll be fine. So more or less, they're just here to exist as an option. I guess maybe if her healing is not enough for Furina, any of the healers here are fine. Overall, Escoffier is definitely best utilized in a full team of Hydro/Cryo units, and usually she will need some energy recharge with Furina, so that could mean swapping in ER Sands instead of attack if you have no energy recharge, like I ended up with these cursed artifacts. But overall, I hope you got the message that just by herself, she's not the most broken unit, and does require a strong core of other supports to fully enable her true power. But still, I'm not gonna lie, when I was personally testing her with all these units and teams, even with Favonius Lance at C0, she felt absolutely broken in the correct teams, and some units like Ayaka, Risley, Child, and Ayato definitely felt like the biggest winners here, but other ones who simply utilized Wheelchair core also felt refreshing to play and felt powerful, even if some of them aren't providing the most value to the team. What can I say? Freeze is back on the menu. Well, to be exact, the teams of Hydro and Cryo are back, baby. Since, you know, the bosses still can be frozen, which is annoying, and I wish Hoyo did something about freeze against bosses. It's not like they cannot tweak the reactions, but whatever, we're here to talk about Ice Latte. So I think the biggest problems I've had with her so far has to do with energy requirements in teams where there's no other cryo unit, or it's not Shenhe with Favonius Lance, or if Escoffier isn't using Favonius Lance. Seriously, the signature weapon is quite cracked, but without like 20 to 40% energy recharge from substats, it's annoying when you switch back to her and the burst is not ready to please Farina. But still, as a C0 unit, as long as you have Favonius Lance, or a Missive Wind Spear, or a Lantern Polearm, and then you've farmed up a good Golden Troop set, she's perfect and super easy to play. But let's not kid ourselves. If just using Escoffier without any of these core members, you will absolutely end up in a different reality than the one we content creators are showcasing. Does that mean she's bad without Farina and Shenhe and Silali and Yalan? I mean, you definitely want at least one of them, and then Xingqiu to create a weaker wheelchair version. But I'd say without these units, I wouldn't pull for Escoffier. Sure, the free-to-play team comp of Rosaria, Xingqiu and Kaya, or Chongyun can be serviceable, but it's definitely not as great as when used with additional core members, since Xingqiu is pretty important for Escoffier teams, but not as big as the other options. Also, we gotta quickly talk about her Constellation's pull value. C1 I think is pretty much there to just boost Ayaka and Wriothesley, maybe Coco Goat as well, but obviously this will always end up boosting Escoffier's crit damage by 60% as well. I think my initial calcs show that this provides overall 15 to 25% damage boost, so it is pretty OP, but for cryo units only. Then C2 is kind of similar to Shenhe's Ice Equals, but I think that's 5 stacks for the whole party, so next 5 cryo attacks coming from anyone will be boosted, and that's it, and of course, each stack is consumed per enemy hit. And then we have the signature. Great stats, and can give her a ton of attack, plus someone else who gets healed will also receive a big 32% attack boost. Sometimes this might end up boosting several teammates when the heal is team-wide, and sometimes when quick swapping, but overall, it's a strong weapon, provided you can burst every rotation, since you will need energy, unless of course you're in team comps where her burst is not needed every rotation. But overall, I'd say maybe the signature is the best option to go for in terms of vertical investment, although if you're gonna play a ton of cryo DPS units, then C1 is also worth it. However, I wouldn't go for any other upgrades yet, although Skirk is starting to show up in people's dreams, so there's still a lot of time to decide how to approach this. But yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to Iced Coffee Chef Cacio a Pepe Pasta Maker 69 for 20. Hope you found this video useful, and I'm gonna go to sleep, and tomorrow I'll whip up some kind of IFAS video for you guys, but not gonna lie, I am dead tired when there's no early access server to work from. Anyway, bye!